Well, thank you, Judith, and hello, greetings, and good evening to you all in University of Winnipeg alumni land. I assume that most of the people in attendance are alums, either recent or not so recent, and perhaps some current students as well. My name is Fred Appel. I graduated from the University of Winnipeg with a BA honors in 1985, and I'm based here on the East Coast in the US Northeast in Princeton, New Jersey, and I am a member of the University of Winnipeg Alumni Council, and I'm very pleased to sort of moderate and take part in a very, what promises to be a really interesting discussion with two distinguished University of Winnipeg alums from the class of 1998. And just before I introduce them and say a little bit about their backgrounds, their biographies, I just want to extend my thank you to the University of Winnipeg Alumni Association and the University of Winnipeg Alumni Office for their support of this program, and also Evan and his colleague at the University of Winnipeg Media Services, who have provided technical support for this event. I really appreciate it. And everyone else at the University of Winnipeg who has spread the word and who has supported this program, people in the Department of Chemistry, notably, and career services. Thank you very much. Just before we get underway, I want to alert everyone in attendance tonight of two future programs coming up later this winter, spring. We have a little informal series organized featuring distinguished University of Winnipeg alumni who are based professionally and personally in the United States. And I will be conducting a series of conversations with them to ask them about how they ended up, where they ended up, and to ask them about their careers and to invite them to offer career advice for current and recent students. Our next event, and do consider marking it on your calendar, is Thursday, February the 16th. That'll start at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. We are featuring two alums from the 1980s, my decade at the University of Winnipeg. And the theme will be healthcare, careers in healthcare and in public health. Tara Shuchuk will be joining us. She is an executive at Medtronic, a medical device company, a very big one based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she will be joined in conversation with Julie Friesen, who is an executive manager at the New York City Department of Health. And they will be talking about careers in healthcare and in public health in the US, in Canada, and elsewhere. And our second spring event in this informal series will take place on Tuesday, March the 21st at 6 p.m. Central. And we are going to feature an alum who graduated with a BSc in 2006. He is Dr. Jordan Sloshower. He is a professor at the Yale School of Medicine, and he is in the forefront of an interesting new movement to introduce psychedelic medicine, medicine that has psychotropic effects on the human mind, and the use of these medicines now in controlled experiments and in therapeutics. So that promises to be a fascinating discussion as well. So with the introductions and the advance advertisements out of the way, it's my great pleasure to say a few words about our invited guests this evening. Angèle Mackey is based right now in Menlo Park, California, just a stone's throw from the world headquarters of Facebook and other social media and tech companies in Silicon Valley. She is a scientist turned deal maker, currently Senior Vice President and Head of Business Development at Recode Therapeutics. This is a company working on the next generation of mRNA and gene correction therapeutics. Dr. Mackey, Angèle, has a PhD in biological chemistry from Stanford University. She completed postdoctoral work at the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla, California, and She received a BSc in chemistry from the University of Winnipeg, as we said earlier, the class of 1998. And her friend and former fellow student at the U of W is Dr. Kleem Chowdhury. He is the Chief Operating and Business Officer at Redona Therapeutics. This is a biotech firm developing medicines to address diseases caused by the dysregulation of RNA and DNA processes and signaling. He's also a deal maker, and he was CEO of a pharma company known as Checkmate that was sold to Regeneron, and he was instrumental in negotiating and moving forward with that deal. Dr. Chowdhury holds a PhD in chemistry from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and also a BSc from the University of Winnipeg, class of 1998. And he is joining us this evening with me on the East Coast in Concord, Massachusetts, a tremendously historically significant small city with a great history. And, you know, I find it interesting that Kleem is at the cutting edge with Angile in biotech and is in such an old city as well. So it's such an interesting contrast. Welcome to you both. And let me begin by asking you both, when I reached out to the two of you, I actually had no idea that you had graduated in the same year at the U of W and that you knew each other. Can I just begin by asking the two of you, and either one could begin, how you met?
You want me to take a stab, Queen?
Go ahead. You probably have a better memory than I do.
Yeah, so when Fred reached out to us or when he reached out to me and told me there was another panelist and then revealed who it was, I laughed to myself because I know Kleem. We met in undergrad and we have remained friends all these years and we see each other periodically. But how we met, Kleem was actually a year behind me in school because he's a little bit younger than me. And we met, I don't remember the exact moment we met, but I remember when we both kind of bonded and became friends. And it's because we were both TAing intro chem labs and we were both applying to graduate school in the US. And we had TA slots, I think, at the same time too. So we would always be chatting and comparing notes about which schools we were interviewing at and which schools we were thinking about going to, et cetera. And then we both got into our programs, both moved to the US. So then we continued to stay in touch and compare notes. And then eventually Kleem moved out to the Bay Area for a little while too. So got to meet his wife and meet his first child way back when. And so I guess that's, if you've got any other parts of the story, Kleem, feel free to add, but I look back at that fondly.
Yeah, no, it's perfect. And yeah, I kind of chuckled too when I saw, oh, Angel's going to be the other panelist. I was like, oh, we could just text each other and arrange it. No big deal.
Now, yeah. if the two of you met as TAs, that I'm assuming that means you met as third year undergraduates, third year students?
I think so, yeah, third or fourth. Maybe. I know it for 2 years.
That sounds about right. Third.
Okay, so were you both at the U of W for 4 years?
I actually did my degree for 5 years.
Okay, you did your degree in 5, and Kleem, were you there for 4 years?
4 years, yeah.
4 years, okay. Did you have the word honors tacked on beside your degree, or it's just a BSc?
We didn't have that back then, I don't think.
Yeah,
right.
I don't think they had that. It was a 4-year BSc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It was it's just strange. I mean, back in my day, in the 1980s, if you did a 4-year undergraduate degree, they tacked on that word honors, which sounded nice. And if you did a 3-year degree, it was just, you know, a BA or a BSc. But, you know,
I don't think it's just 3 or 4 year. And then the US, they don't even have that concept. They just have a bachelor's degree.
They do not. They do not. I'm still proudly say I'm a BA honors. It just sounds so cool, agreed. You know. Yeah. It just means I stuck it out. It just means I stuck it out for another year, a final 4th year. So it's interesting to note that the two of you were TAs when you met. I mean, in many undergraduate colleges and universities in the US, TAs tend to be graduate students.
Yeah, that's true.
And so you were. I could assume that the two of you were precocious, but that's just the thing. At the University of Winnipeg, upper level undergraduates, 3rd, 4th year students become TAs. And was it I mean, as you recall your, I don't know, 19, 20-year-old selves, was it a daunting experience? Did you find it a challenge to begin to mentor people who were, quite close in age to you?
I didn't actually. I hadn't really thought about it that way, Fred. It was actually a really great opportunity, and it was not daunting. It was challenging at times because, as I was telling someone earlier, you had the pre-med students who would fight over every single little point, and then you had some students who were taking chemistry as their science credit. And
Yeah,
chemistry is not the easiest one to take, frankly. So
yeah.
you had quite a spectrum of students.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. It didn't seem. I mean, I saw it at the time as a great opportunity,
Mhm.
and it ended up being very useful. I think
Yeah.
we'll probably ask some other questions about University of Winnipeg, how it prepared us. Maybe I'll preempt that a little bit with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
TAing. I think that's a differentiator, right? When we're applying to grad schools, that
Mhm.
being able to do, in my case, undergraduate research projects, but then also TAing, like you said, a lot of the bigger schools, whether it's in the U.S. or in Canada, those
Mhm.
opportunities aren't necessarily there. So it was super helpful.
In addition to being TAs, the two of you were working under the supervision of one of your profs, one of your chemistry profs, doing projects, perhaps?
Clem did, I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, so I worked with Professor Andrew Grant, who was a chemistry professor there at the time, who was actually, I think when I took second year organic chemistry, I think that might have been his first year teaching there.
Okay.
And I was I'm not a shy person, so I was like, hey, he doesn't have any students working for him yet. Here's my opportunity. And I went and talked to him and said, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, but do you need anybody? And he thought that was great, that like I was interested. And long story short, we figured it out. I got an opportunity to start in the summer, and then I ended up doing fourth year research project and everything that's associated with that as well too.
Wow. Was this pro bono on your part, Claim, or did he have a little stipend for you?
It's interesting, and it kind of goes into like just go and ask and chat with people. I was like, hey, I'm interested in doing this. I'd love to do a summer project. And he's like, well, I don't have any money. And I was like, that's okay. I'll do it anyways. He's like, no. I'll figure it out. I'll find some money. And he did, right? So
That's
it ended
awesome.
up being a summer job.
Wow.
And for a couple summers, which was helpful as well.
What was the name of the prof you both TA'd for?
Well, it
I
was
don't remember.
it was the intro chem lab. So
It was okay.
there was more than one
Yeah, so there's a
professor who
bunch of
taught intro
profs,
chem.
right?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. It was Team Todd.
Brian
Got it.
Pettit was one of them.
Yes.
And Devin Latimer was, and he's still there. He was in charge, I think, of organic chemistry labs, but I can't remember if he was our boss or not.
When we had an introductory chat, the three of us with Judith earlier, some names were bandied about of a few current U of W chemistry profs, people who are still there who you remember from your time. Can you remind me of their names?
Claim?
Well, I was just looking at the website and I see that he's on there. Doug Goltz and Doug Craig. I remember the Dougs.
Yeah, the Dougs. Okay.
As key ones. But other than that, I don't think. I think Angel, you mentioned somebody as well too, right?
So Devin Latimer is still there, I noticed. And he was the instructor for our organic chemistry lab.
Yeah.
And Desiree Vanderwell's still there too. And I remember she was the one that I actually sought advice about going to the US for grad school. I went and spoke with her.
So I want to speak to the two of you in just a few moments about your respective decisions to go to graduate school. But before we do that, I can't help myself, and I have to just zoom out a little bit and ask you about your U of Winnipeg experience more generally, because you did have these formative experiences, TAing, working for a chem prof in Cleem's case. Presumably, you took courses in other departments. Maybe you did some extracurriculars. Maybe you hung out a lot in the buffeteria. I mean, could you share one or two formative or especially cherished U of W memories?
Go ahead. Do you have one, Angel?
So I'll just mention that although I didn't do a research project with a professor, at the time that I was there, there was a co-op program. I don't know if it exists still.
Mm.
But so that gave me the opportunity to work in different labs over the summer for 4 different summers. So I worked in a food lab, I worked in an enzyme engineering lab, and that one was in Montreal. The food lab was in Winnipeg. They've since closed that down though and consolidated in Ottawa. And then the last 2 summers were in a plant biotech lab in Saskatoon. So that gave me great hands-on lab experience prior to graduating.
You were moving around quite a lot as an, as an undergraduate student.
That gave me the bug to leave Winnipeg, actually. When I lived in Montreal that first summer, I was like, oh, wow, there's this whole other world out there.
Okay. Were you introduced to Montreal bagels during that brief period? Yeah.
I still like bagels.
Yeah.
California ones are not good.
What about you, Clem? Do you recall, are there any formative or any especially interesting or amusing memories from U of W undergrad?
Nothing that amusing that I can
Yeah.
recall, but I think when I think back to those years, I think probably about the later year or so, and the group of people, and Angel and I think know a lot of these people because it was a small university and a small department, and then there's even a smaller subset of chemistry majors, and then even in a smaller subset of people who are either TAing and or doing research. There was just a core group of people that became friends, and we all got along, and it was just we would hang out in the hallway. I don't know if it's still the same hallway. I remember the hallway, right?
I do too.
We'd hang out around there, in between activities, in between
Absolutely.
working in the lab or TAing.
Oh yeah, I mean, fantastic. That's fantastic. You hung out together in the hallways. I wonder if if the two of you and the crowd that you hung out with, did you all grow up in Winnipeg? And if so, like what neighborhoods did you grow up in? I'm a River Heights boy myself. Where did you grow up, the two of you?
I grew up in St. Vital.
St. Vital.
So I grew up in a couple different places. I started off in my younger years in Windsor Park, and then when I was in 5th grade, we moved out to Oakbank. So I went to school in Oakbank. I graduated from Springfield.
Okay.
We lived out there.
Excellent. So the two of you decided, I guess independently, perhaps in comparing notes, to apply to graduate school as you were nearing the end of your undergraduate education. Did either of you consider at any time hitting the pause button on your education, working for a year or two, or backpacking or traveling, or were you just really revved up and keen to just continue your education immediately?
I didn't consider taking a break at all. I think Angel mentioned Dr. Vanderwall, and I had Dr. Grant who gave me similar advice as I was talking about grad school. And I think we both got the same advice, right? Of like, yeah, can't really argue with going to the US, right? You can always come back and you'll have opportunities there. And so it was like, yeah, you might as well do that. And then I also came to this realization, maybe we both did. I think a lot of people kind of do. I'm like, what? If I do a PhD, they pay me?
Yeah.
What? I'm like, so that's like a job, right? So I'll be independent. Like I don't need any, like I don't have to pay tuition. I get paid to do research. I was like, yeah, why not? Right.
Yeah.
And so that sort of underlined it for me. It still amazes me to this day that people don't know that more widely, that most, sciences and arts as well too. If you get a PhD, and I'm sure people get paid a lot more than it was in our day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Angel? Were you at all tempted, or did you did it cross your mind?
I was so hardcore. It was like school.
Yeah.
No inkling of taking a break. However, I actually encourage people to do it now. And the reason I do is because in hindsight, life is long. So there isn't a big rush to get into grad school. Also, the attrition in grad school is really high. A lot of people realize it's not what they want to do and they drop out. And I think a lot of people end up there just because of momentum and it's not the right decision for them. So I actually think it's great to take some time off and maybe work in your field, get a lab job if that's what's interesting, see if you really like it before you make that commitment to go to graduate school or travel the world if you want to. you know?
Yes.
I didn't have a kid for a really long time, way later than
Yes.
Clem did. And I was able to go to Europe a lot with one of my jobs, and my partner would come with me. And so, but I had that opportunity through my job. Not everyone does. So maybe go do that between your undergrad and your grad school.
Yeah. Now let me ask the two of you about your decision to apply to graduate programs in the United States. So when I was growing up in Winnipeg in the late 70s, and thinking about undergraduate, I, I was not in a milieu or in an environment in which a lot of my friends were looking to the United States. It was either the University of Winnipeg or it was the University of Manitoba. It was one
Absolutely.
or the other. That was
Yeah.
my world, and it was a pretty constrained world. And but even as an undergraduate, it was daunting to think about the great Canadian universities to the east, McGill and U of T and UBC. And I guess I wasn't encouraged by too many people to look south to the States. Where did you get the impetus? Was it your mentors and your professors who were encouraging you to look south, or did you decide this on your own?
For me, it was when I was working in the plant biotech lab, which was a government lab, by the way, in Saskatoon. It was a division of the National Research Council, so it paid very well too. There was actually a whole cohort of us summer students, and so of course we became friends and hung out together. And one of the students was a year ahead of me, and he was going to the US for graduate school. So I grilled him, like, what's the deal with going to the US for graduate school? Because I already knew I wanted to leave Winnipeg. Having lived in Montreal that summer, I was like, I'm leaving Winnipeg when I'm done. But before that, I was like you, I'm like, going to University of Winnipeg or University of Manitoba? Or in my case, it's University of Winnipeg, and then I'm going to finish at University of Manitoba. And then I lived in Montreal. I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave Winnipeg. And then I met this person, and he told me about going to the US. I'm like, okay, maybe I'll go to the US. And that's when I started talking to, like, exploring it. And I talked to Dr. Vanderwell too. And she's like, I hate to say this, but you could, if you go to the US and come back, you'll be even more employable. And it also opens up job opportunities in the US.
Huh. Why did she hate to say that? And
I don't know if she exactly said that. This is how I remember it, but probably because she doesn't want to lose talent to the US,
Yeah. But there was a sense that the credentialing that you would get in the US would be looked upon with great favor, perhaps. Yeah. Clean, what's your story? Did you come upon this idea yourself? Were you inspired by an article you read or by some conversations?
I think for me, I decided the type of work that I wanted to do in graduate school, the type of research I wanted to do, which was natural products synthesis, synthesis of complex natural products, because I probably through mentorship from Professor Grant and also maybe from other reading or whatever I'd done, I decided that was a good path, and it was interesting to me, and it was kind of what I'd already been doing to a small extent and as an undergraduate.
Yes.
And as part of that, I'm reading papers and I'm learning about who's in the field, and most of them are in the US. And so that was part of it. And then I looked at Canadian schools too. I still remember, like, and I don't know if they still do this, right? But I remember applying back in those days. You filled out paper applications, mailed them in, you waited for the envelope to come back, right? And then when you got accepted to a university, they would they pay for you to take a trip and check it out. And sometimes it would be, some of them were just individual. I was just doing it on my own. Sometimes they'd have like a weekend where they invite a couple weekends where they'd invite a bunch of prospective students. And I just thought that was great too. I'm like, wow, they're paying for a trip, right? Basically an all expenses paid trip. And I visited a bunch of schools, right? I was UNC, I visited Emory in Atlanta. I remember went down to Florida. And I remember like narrowing it down to a couple, and I was focusing on the people that I wanted to work for, which I think was actually, that's a big part of my overall career story, focusing on the people. And then I also remember visiting University of Alberta, and it was February, and it was like, Edmonton's like Winnipeg. And then like, it was one weekend, the next weekend I went down to North Carolina, and I play basketball. I love basketball. I coach basketball. And it was basketball season, and I went out and watched a game with them, and it was like plus 20 Celsius or something. And I was like, how can I not go here?
I think the attendance of local sports events is an important recruitment device, which is sort of underplayed. That's quite amazing. Angèle, you eventually ended up at Stanford University for your PhD in biological chemistry. Was there one particular individual you were focused on under whom you wanted to work and learn?
Yeah. I don't think I didn't pick my professor as far in advance as Clean, but I knew I was kind of focused on schools that had interdisciplinary programs where you could sort of rotate through different departments. Because I was very much interested in life sciences like biotech or pharma. And so I focused on programs that were interdisciplinary and I could rotate through different labs before choosing my advisor.
Yeah.
So the advisor I decided to choose was one that was focused on DNA-based analogs. So he had both chemistry and more biologically oriented people in the lab. So using those non-natural DNA bases to either engineer new function into nucleic acids or to probe basic science questions. So to me, it resonated with me because it was very biotech-y, and that was interesting to me. So that's why I ended up choosing his lab.
So thank you. Let me ask you now about the immigration piece. So you're Canadians, you're Canadians in your early 20s. You're applying to grad schools in the States. This does mean you need a visa, right? Was that whole piece kind of scary or daunting for you to navigate? And did you have to do it on your own? Did the prospective graduate schools provide you with advice? Did you get advice in Winnipeg?
The university sponsor you. You basically just have to fill out forms and.
Okay, yeah, so they send you the forms and they do it all. Yes.
They did it all. I just remember this. It was like a paper thing that you put on your passport. I forget what it was called.
Yeah.
It was a student visa, whatever it is. They did it.
F1.
It was not. I don't remember it being stressful at all. The only thing so I made a decision to actually go down early, and it started in September, and I made a decision. I'm going to go down early. I'm going to settle in, and since I already knew who I wanted to work with, I discussed it with him. He said, yeah, come early. You can come work for me in the summer as a job as well, too. That was a little more complicated, but it was actually still pretty easy. There's this visa. It's called the TN visa, I believe. It was from NAFTA now. What's it called? USMCA.
Yep.
Probably the same thing. And if you have a degree in a certain field, and chemistry is one of them, and you have a job offer, I remember actually I showed up at the border and
with a letter,
driving down, and I had a letter that said, "Here's this job. Here's how much you're getting paid, and here's what it's for." Yeah. And literally, I had my degree, my BSc in chemistry, like literally the actual degree, and I had it in the frame, and I had to show both of them. Here, I'm qualified for this, and I paid like $50 when I got the visa, and I kept driving. Right. So
yeah, I was on a TN visa too. That was my very first visa that I had when I worked my very first job in academic book publishing, and they had to give me the title technical publications writer because that was one of the designated TN occupations, and so they had to kind of tweak the job offer to make it seem as though I was a viable and a legit technical publications writer.
Yeah. When my first job was trying to get me my H-1B, which is it's longer for those on the call that don't know. The TN visa or whatever it's called now, that's a short-term one. I think you have to renew it quite frequently.
Every year.
And you can apply for a green card from the TN.
Yes.
The H-1B was a 4-year visa and you could apply for a green card from that one. So my work campaigned to get me an H-1B, but they had to create a really kind of unique job description to make the case that I was the only one suitable for this job. And therefore I should get an H-1B. Yeah.
Yeah. I also got it. When did you graduate from?
Stanford, 2003.
Stanford. Okay, same year. I also did an H-1B. So I actually got married in grad school, but honestly, and then I went and worked for Gilead, after I graduated from grad school, and they just went and said, we'll do an H-1B for you. And so I actually, even though it would have been easier to do it through marriage, I didn't have to do any work. So I was like, I'll just let them do it.
Yeah.
And so they did the H-1B, they processed it all. I did that. And then later on, when I applied for green card, I did it through marriage, which is way faster. And that was easy. I
Ah,
didn't have to hire an attorney or anything. But at the time, I was just kind of overwhelmed, and I let them do it all. So
Yeah, so
so
my work did my H-1B and then they did my green card, and so I'm Clem has become a citizen. I have not. I'm still on a green card. I could become a citizen. I just haven't. Just inertia.
inertia, yeah, it's certainly not as complicated a process to become a citizen as it is to get the H-1B. I mean, in terms of
Or a green card in the first
or
time.
the green card. Yeah, there's a lot less
The
expense.
challenge though is I do have to renew the green card every 10 years. So I've had to renew it once. So I have to go to the
Yes.
INS in San Francisco and do it, which is
Okay.
not necessarily a fun thing to do, but
So one of the important takeaways, I guess, about this immigration talk for those who are listening to us and watching us now is that when you were sort of like upper level undergraduate students looking to these American graduate schools, and when you were in graduate school looking to your first employers, there were people who were doing the paperwork and hiring the lawyers to do this for
absolutely.
you. It was not a daunting process that you were alone doing, right?
Nope, never. Yeah.
I was never stressed. It may be different today. I don't know, but I was
Yeah.
never worried about it at all.
I wasn't either. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, that said, to represent accurately the situation, there's a bunch of people that have been laid off in tech recently, and I'm more aware of it because where I live. But
Yes.
a lot of people have been laid off in tech, and if they don't find a job in 30 days, they're out of the country because they have lost their visas.
Yes. You're speaking, I guess, to a great extent about technical workers, scientists from India or from all over.
No, anywhere. I'm sure there's a lot
Okay.
of them from India, but it's anyone who's here working on a visa. If they've been laid off, they need to find another job or they're booted out of the country.
Yeah. So those visas, I guess you're talking about the so-called H visa, those visas are contingent on your being gainfully employed. Yeah.
I think both are, aren't they? The TN and the H1. The H1 you can actually transfer to another employer. The TN you cannot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. There is also, I'm remembering now, I forgot. With the student visa, I forget what it's called, but you have the ability to work without doing an
worked under
H1
my
for a
employer.
year,
Yep.
for 1 or 2 years or something like that.
I did
But
that.
again, you can't go from there to a green card. Yeah,
Correct.
I
Okay.
think that's why I was like, you're going to do an H1 for me, just do the H1. I don't
Yeah.
have to worry about
All
it.
right. So Angel, you made the leap to graduate school at Stanford in right next to Silicon Valley in Northern California, and you are there now. Was there a hiatus period between your graduation from Stanford and your current position in Menlo Park, which is really close to Stanford? Were you working all over the world? Were you working in other parts of the US or?
Okay, good question. So I did a short postdoc down at Scripps in San Diego or La Jolla, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Right, Southern
The
California.
reason-
Yeah.
Yeah, the reason is that I graduated in 2003 and the job market was pretty bad then. The genomics bubble had just popped. The .com bubble had just popped. So people were laying off. There wasn't a lot of funding going into biotech. So it was really hard to find the kind of job I wanted. So I went and did a postdoc down in San Diego, although it's not what I wanted to do. But I also didn't want to lose my visa and have to leave the country.
Yes.
So that was my motivation. And then, and this is a lesson for the folks on the call, is that the importance of networking. So I continued to do tons of networking through graduate school and even after to try to get myself a job. And in 2004, I volunteered for the Bio International Conference, which is one of the biggest biotech conferences every year. It's always in the US. I think it's been in Canada twice maybe, but it's always in the US anywhere from April to June. And when I was a postdoc, I volunteered at Bio, and in exchange for my volunteer time, I got free passes to go to Bio. So I went there and networked my heart out. And I met a company that was looking for a junior level business development person, and they wanted someone who's technically trained. 2 weeks later, I had a job offer from them. So it's a bit of a Cinderella story, but it's also like putting yourself out there, and the expression chance favors the prepared mind applies highly.
You mentioned volunteer work. You worked as a volunteer for this conference, which I guess was an annual event over 4 or 5 days. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
It's exactly. It's a huge biotech conference. It covers all aspects of biotech, like ag biotech, human healthcare, diagnostics, everything. And it's massive. So they do recruit local volunteers to help run it too.
Huh.
We
It's
have
been
staff,
quite
but
it's been quite a while since that event. But I wonder, I mean, it was such a must have been such a humongous event with so many people circulating and so
yeah,
many different company representatives circulating around.
yeah,
How did you not feel lost and befuddled and baffled as to
yeah,
what to do and who to speak to?
yeah.
I mean,
I
I
just spoke to
understand
everyone.
you just spoke to everyone, but like, did you target certain individuals whom?
No,
No,
no, it
no.
really is. I can tell you the details even. It's really a Cinderella story. So it was in San Francisco that year. It does move around the country, but it was in San Francisco that year. And I was looking, there were protesters outside. I don't remember what they were protesting. Maybe animal testing or something there, but they were outside protesting. And I
Okay.
was looking out the window at the protesters, and another woman came up beside me and was also looking out. Turns out she was like the second in command of research at this company. And I just started talking to her about what her company did, what I want to do. And she's like, you know, we might actually have a entry-level position opening or open. And so then she introduced me to the VP of BD the next day. And then I think I went and visited them. And like I said, 2 weeks later, I had a job offer. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. Anything comparable happened to you as you were, finishing up your PhD in Chapel Hill, Clem?
No, I had nothing like that.
Yeah.
Because I had a
I know
more
when I talk about it,
traditional.
it sounds pretty
I think I
incredible.
had a more traditional path. I had decided what I wanted to do. I wanted to do medicinal chemist. I wanted to be a medicinal chemist. With my training as in organic chemistry, it's basically,
Yeah, in the
you're
private
gonna
sector. In the private
in the
sector.
in the
Yeah.
private, yeah. So I decided to go private sector, and there's basically two paths. Do you want to be a medicinal chemist? Do you want to be a process chemist?
Mhm.
And so for those who don't know, the medicinal chemist is, you're the one inventing the molecules that could be the drug, right? And making them in small quantities and testing them and sort of shepherding that process to pick a candidate that will eventually go into clinical trials, et cetera. The process chemists are the people who just focus on the pure chemistry. Once you've decided on this is the one, we're going to go in the clinic, you got to make lots of it. The process chemists figure out what's the most efficient way to make that in large quantities, right? So I decided, I want to be the medicinal chemist. And then I went out and actually I had a discussion with my graduate advisor previously. Should I do postdoc? Should I not? And the thing is, like, you need for the best postdocs, unless you're Cinderella like Angel, which I think she did that twice. I think with getting your postdoc, you got a great postdoc, and then
Yeah.
also with the job you got, you were very fortunate, I think, right, to get those and just be in the right situation. But typically, you got to plan in advance. To people pick who they're going to have as postdocs in their lab in advance. So I was having this discussion 18, maybe even 24 months in advance with my
And I can
graduate
do that.
advisor of like, hey, what do you think I should do? Because if I'm gonna do a postdoc, well, I gotta start planning and figure out and start talking to people. He said at the time, there's tons of jobs. You've done great. You'll find a job, no problem. And then it did change. I did get a great job, but I went and just interviewed. Some companies came to campus. I went to American Chemical Society conference, and people would interview. There'd be like an interviewing job forum at the conference. I remember actually it was in Boston by chance. That's how I got the job at Gilead, amongst other interviews that I had as well too. There was somebody there who was interviewing and like potential candidates and screening people for future.
The pharma companies are
interviews.
always actively recruiting chemists. So it's a little bit different with that particular discipline, is they will they will go visit universities in the fall and actively recruit, especially med chemists like Clean.
I don't know if it's the same anymore. A lot of med chemists,
really?
the world has changed, right? Because I mean, I know our company, we do all of our chemistry in China and India now. I think it's just more globalized.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Clem, the first company you worked for after you finished your PhD was this company called Gilead. Is that right?
Gilead Sciences in Foster City, California.
And so you moved to the West Coast. And is that near where Angel is now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Just up the highway. Yeah.
Did the two of you reconnect? Oh, fantastic.
That's what I mentioned earlier. I got to meet his wife and see his first baby. I remember going out for dinner, him bringing her in a car seat.
That's fantastic. Now, I must ask both of you. I mean, the two of you were in top graduate programs, UNC, Chapel Hill, and Stanford, and presumably a hefty chunk of grad students in your cohort must have wanted to go on into academia to do academic research. and take the professorial track. Were either of you tempted, even for a second, to go the academic route?
I was not. No.
So when I started, even when I was at U of W thinking about chemistry and go to grad school, I thought I was going to be an academic. And then as I went through grad school, I decided that I wasn't going to. And I think a lot of people decide not to for many reasons, right? Especially it's getting harder and harder, right? You survive
So
off the
hard.
grant, and especially in the big universities.
Yes.
You have to pay yourself, pay a chunk of your income out of grants to run your lab, et cetera. It's tough, right? It's a tough
Yes.
life. And
Yes.
then on top of it, again, I went through this. I'm like, they'll pay me to go to grad school. And then I was like, wow, you make how much money working in industry? Right. It just became more and more like, okay, I'm going to go down this path.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Same
super hard
deal
to
with
be
you,
a professor.
Angel?
Yeah, I never thought about becoming a professor. I always thought about going into industry, but I thought I was going to go into industry as a scientist. And then in my second year of graduate school, I'm like, I don't really like bench work, lab work that much. I love science, but I don't like being in the lab. There's a lot of troubleshooting of experiments. It's very solitary. But I love science. What else could I do? So started reading books and doing informational interviews, which is other advice I would give to folks on this Zoom. To start to explore, and I feel like it's a bit of a pejorative, but I started exploring alternative careers in science. And I found this great book called Alternative Careers in Science by Cynthia Robbins Roth.
Okay.
Probably a little dated, but still, those jobs still exist. And in each chapter, she profiled different jobs that were not traditional lab jobs. And there was a chapter on business development. I'm like, this sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
And so that's what I ultimately decided to pursue.
Yes.
And I did lots of stuff on the side during grad school too. Like I took a class in the Stanford Law School called Biotech Law and Policy, where I learned a lot of business actually. I was networking. I was part of the business school biotech club, took a seminar course on biotech. So I was doing stuff on the side to educate myself on it.
Yes.
But then the really ironic thing is the first job that I got that I mentioned earlier through the bio conference was a company called Metarex. And the head of BD there was the person who was in that chapter in that book.
Wow.
And it was complete coincidence that I ended up at that company.
Wow. You are Cinderella.
So wait, this brings me to another question I wanted to ask actually both of you, is the nature of your professional identity and how that has evolved. So you were trained as research scientists. Angèle, for her part, decided early on that she did not want to be a research scientist. So when you began working professionally in the private sector, it was not as a research scientist. It was as a manager, a coordinator, a what were you? What was that first job?
My first job was in business development. So I was
in
manager
business
of
development.
business development. Manager, but that doesn't mean you actually manage anyone. That's like one of the lowest titles possible in BD. It's either like associate or manager.
Okay.
It's probably useful to explain to people too what BD is, right? Because we take it for granted. Business development, BD, that's our careers, right? It's deal making. It's like you're in charge. Like it's the mismatch. It's a mishmash of science and strategy and deal making, but fundamentally you are trying to find deals and then go and negotiate them and get them done to either sell or partner off something that your company has, or to bring things into your company, depending which side of it you're on.
Deals between companies.
Right.
Because Clem and I are both at little companies, we're more likely to be trying to do deals with bigger companies that will give our little companies money. So we might have a hot technology or a hot therapeutic candidate that's still experimental that the big company wants, and so we'll license it to them.
Okay. So your involvement in BD right now, as deal makers, you are managing small companies that have developed proprietary technologies, and the goal of BD in these cases is to sell or to license this proprietary technology that you own and manage to larger firms that maybe have bigger infrastructure or ways of developing it or ways of marketing it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in our case, our platform can do lots of different things, our technology. And so we're not going to be able to do it all in-house. So we are going to develop, or we are developing our own drug pipeline, but we'll also out-license the ability to do other things with our technology that we're not going to do to make the best possible use out of it. And to be clear, our technology was in license from a university, so it wasn't homegrown. It spun out of UT Southwestern, and then we've built upon it, of course. But so if we do eventually commercialize drugs, we will owe a small royalty to that university.
Okay,
Yeah.
now how did that tie between that small university and your biotech firm develop? Was a professor or researcher at that university, did he or she jump ship and come to work for you?
No, he still is at the University of Texas
Okay.
Southwestern. He and a couple other people spun the technology out of UT Southwestern into a company called Recode. We refer to them as Recode 1.0 because that company eventually merged with a California company called Transcriptics. But we
Yes.
have the Recode name, so now we refer to ourselves kind of as Recode 2.0. But he has kept his job, and he is the chair of our scientific advisory board, though, and he's a consultant to us as well.
Now,
So many times biotechs do spin out of universities, but not always.
Yes. Here in Princeton, New Jersey, where I'm based, I know a whole bunch of former research scientists and former practicing physicians who have jumped into pharma. Of course, I mean, this is a
Yep.
big pharma
Merck,
hub.
BMS, yep.
Exactly.
I've many times.
Bristol Myers Squibb and Merck and Johnson and Johnson is just up the road, and all of them. Now, some of them felt the need to take business degrees because they're transitioning from research medicine into management. They felt they needed to get an MBA, or so they did it part-time or whatever. Now, did either of you feel tempted or were motivated or were encouraged to pursue explicitly management related degrees, or did you just sort of more effectively learn by doing?
I was interested in doing an MBA, but I never even applied for one. So
Yeah.
I just learned on the job.
Yeah. What about you, Clem?
I was probably mildly interested at one point, but realized I didn't need to.
Yeah.
I think that's been underlined in my experience since. But to Angel's point earlier about doing informational interviews and talking to people, that's what I mean, I was working, my situation is a little different, right? I was working as a scientist at Gilead, medicinal chemist, and then I decided, okay, I want to make a change. I toyed with this idea in grad school, but I didn't know enough, right? I didn't know what the jobs were. I just thought I'm going to be on the business side at one point. I didn't really know what that was. And then I got into company and I was like, oh, I want to do this. And I realized, oh, it's really hard to do that. It's really, I mean, Angel had the Cinderella story. I felt like it was super hard. I happened to know somebody. I happened to have an acquaintance in the Bay Area who was not in biotech. He was in the tech industry, and he was a guy who was, I think he was at Macromedia. He had sold this company and he had a bunch of money, and now he was an investor. I happened to get to know this guy, and I was talking to him, and he's like, what do you want to do with your career? And I told him, he's like, oh, I'll introduce you to some people. And so this is a useful story. I think I tell it to anybody who comes to me who's a scientist who says, I want to move and do a business job. I tell them the story. So I met a bunch of people. Angel may know Tim Draper. He's a very well-known tech investor. My son knows him. He's done a lot of cryptocurrency stuff lately. My 16-year-old son knew. I told him the story recently. He's like,
wait, your 16-year-old son is into cryptocurrency?
Different story.
Okay, different story. Okay, we'll put that aside.
We'll put that aside. So anyways, I go and meet Tim Draper. And I probably didn't really recognize at the time, but now I'm like, I can't believe I got it. And I sit down, I'm sitting in his office, and he's like, how can I help you? I'm like, okay, I'm a medicinal chemist. I'm interested in business, working in a venture firm or blah, 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 right? And he looks at me and he says, nah, I don't really see it. When you were a little kid, you were probably playing with a chemistry set. You probably weren't like me, like selling stuff and like building business. He's like, and he said this statement. And that's very key to me. He said, there's lots of disgruntled scientists who think they want to do something else. He's like, I don't know that that's you, but you need to like show people that you can do something else. And I remember being like so offended, right? Wow. But also I walked away and I was like, he's right. How am I going to show that I can do something else? Right.
And how did you?
So I started thinking more broadly. So so there's more to the story. I got introduced, I don't know if it was through him or the same original guy, to a biotech investor.
Yeah.
He was more helpful. He said, you should do business development. Let me introduce you to, you probably know Codexis, Angel. He's like, oh, I know the head of BD at Codexis. I'm on their board. They might need someone. I went, I almost got a job there. It was so close. And then they decided, as a small company does, we need to use that headcount for something else rather than business and prioritize something else. And then I just got frustrated. And so what I did is I backed up and I said, all right, I just need to show that I can do something else. I should be open to any sort of transitionary job. And then I just started to be open. And when I would see something that was just at a pharma company that was different, then I would look into it. And that's how I ended up joining Novartis. I joined a role first that was not about, it was an odd role actually, but I viewed it as a transition role. And that role was focused on, it was super interesting. It was focused on the culture of scientists and how do you get scientists to interact and collaborate better together in a giant multinational company that has like 10 research sites around the world, which was Novartis. And it was a job never heard of, actually a job that I don't even know if it exists anymore, but for a period of time they had it and existed in a group. And I got to go in there and I got to travel around the world. I got to like come up with cool ideas. I got credibility with scientists there because I had worked as a scientist. And then more importantly, it kind of just all worked out. This is, I guess, my Cinderella type of story. I was there, right place. They knew me. I knew them. There happened to be a role in BD. And I was like, hey, I want to do that. Oh, we need somebody to do infectious diseases. Oh, I used to work on hepatitis C at Gilead. And then that's how I got down that path.
Wow. So, okay, this is a great story, Clem. So where were you professionally and personally when you were applying to this company? I'm stumbling over its pronunciation. Novartis?
Novartis. Yeah.
Excuse me. Novartis. Pharma or no?
Novartis Pharma. Swiss company.
Novartis Pharma. So were you at Gilead or were you still a graduate student?
No, I was at Gilead. Yeah.
You were at Gilead. Okay. So now you mentioned that it was a kind of a strange or an unusual job at the Swiss company, Novartis. Did you take that job because you felt that you just needed to get a foot in the door and it didn't really matter what the position was? You felt that once you were in that system,
there's more to the story, I suppose. No, I mean, there's all, for me, all the job changes that I've had, there's been a push and a pull, I feel like. And so, because like to even like get up and look, you're not satisfied about something of your current situation. And I think for us, so personally, Angel, maybe you only met my first kid. I don't know. I have 4 kids now. Yeah. Our 2 older kids were born in California. So we had kids. And so my second child was probably not born yet when I started this because we moved when he was 6 months old. But I'm from Winnipeg. My wife's from Georgia. It's a long way from California, and anybody who's dealt with like multiple time zones difference, it's just hard to communicate. It's a long way for people to visit. And then when you have kids, it's even more, we're like, we have nobody here, right? And we don't have anybody in Boston either, but it's way close. Well, now we do, but it's way closer, right? To just fly or talk on the phone. So we didn't, unlike Angel, who loves the Bay Area, I never really loved it that much, right? There's pros and cons to it. My wife didn't either. So we were like, let's move east. And we thought about it, we researched, and we decided on Boston, and so that was one. And then the other part of it is, honestly, the one main boss I had at Gilead, I couldn't stand him. And so I was like, I got to get out of here. This Gilead is my chance.
Known to have a very harsh culture.
They are, and it's great training to work in a harsh culture, right? And actually, Novartis is known to be more harsh too. I had to learn to be nicer, frankly, after working those 2 companies, after surviving there. But so we've partly pushed of like, we want to move east. I need a job change, and then there was also the pull, and I was like, that's funny. You don't know Novartis. Novartis to me, like, was always like, they're like I thought they were the best company in the world, right? I mean, a giant company, Swiss company, at the time it was 120,000 people. There's still probably around 100,000 people or something like that in the company. Back then, but I still think now, highly respected scientifically, lots of great contributions. And so I was just like, when I saw a job at Novartis, I was like, great, I'll do that. Now, I didn't know what it was going to turn out to be, right? But I figured, so I always sort of plan ahead, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
maybe this will lead to BD, but maybe it'll lead to one of his other alternative careers,
Mhm.
right? And
Yes.
maybe
Yes.
and who knows, right? I wasn't so set on there's only this
Yeah.
one career.
Yeah.
The other
So I
thing that
just
we
took it.
haven't
I took it
mentioned,
on the risk.
the other thing that we haven't mentioned is that Boston and the Bay Area are the epicenters of biotech in the world.
Okay.
So if Novartis didn't work out for him, he'd have 100 other options.
Right.
Well, it wasn't like that when I came here, though.
Oh,
Actually,
no? Okay.
no, it wasn't. It was starting to be. It was starting to be bigger, but not like it is now. Where there literally is like 200 other options here now.
Yeah.
But
The job,
but
Cliff and I were joking before the webinar started that it's really hard to hire people because they have so many options.
Right. So I imagine that the New England Boston nexus for biotech arose somewhat later, much later, perhaps than Silicon Valley. Yeah. Or not.
I think there was always a center here, right? But I
Uh-huh.
think there's just been more and more consolidation into the space. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
a lot of and now we're changing. I don't know if we're changing that dramatically, but there's a changing mindset. I know from talking with venture capital investors over the years, there are a bunch that are based here. There's a bunch that are based in San Francisco, and then they're scattered in different other places. But there are
Yeah.
a lot in Boston.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and a lot of the investors used to say, I know they got to this point before the pandemic of, no, I only invest in companies that are local because I don't want to be traveling all over. I got to look after my companies here.
I've heard the same thing.
Now I think it's changed because everybody does Zoom, right?
Yeah.
They're more open to it. But
Right.
now what's happened is people, even though it's so expensive in Boston or in San Francisco, when you start a little company, it's really easy to hire people, like even though it's competitive, but there are people here.
Yes.
Contrast that if you started a biotech company in Winnipeg,
Right.
you have
Yeah.
to convince people to move, right?
Yeah.
And get up and go
Right.
there.
Exactly. I guess it's no coincidence that, Silicon Valley, Menlo Park, Palo Alto on the one hand, the Boston area on the other, there's a nexus of world-class universities
Yeah. Not a
down,
coincidence at all.
down the street.
Yeah.
So that's huge, right? So
Yeah.
you've got a labor pool, a potential labor pool coming out of these.
We also have
excellent
UCSF
programs.
and Berkeley too. Yeah. So we've got 3 great schools for
Yeah.
science. So that absolutely helps. And then Boston
Yeah.
has so many universities.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe this is a nice segue to some more career advice for the people attending this this webinar. If they are considering something like higher education or further training, I mean, moving to an area with really excellent universities, you could do worse than doing that, because where there are excellent universities, there might be some really great innovative companies, small and large. What do you think?
Totally agree. And I think similarly, there's a burgeoning biotech industry in Vancouver too, or outside Vancouver. Again, there's a good school there. Climate's mild too. That doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I think, as I think about this, I and mentor different people. There's a couple of things to think about. One is, how important is it to you to live in a certain place or have flexibility of that? I didn't think about that. I didn't know enough, right? But
Yep.
If I was thinking I want to have the flexibility to live in Winnipeg and pursue a career, I wouldn't have picked this career. But I didn't think about it, and also I didn't think that I needed to live in Winnipeg, right?
Right.
I wasn't decided when I left. But if that's important to you, you might want to pick a different path. I'm kind of dealing with this with my older kids now. My eldest is just graduating; she's in grade 12 right now, and that's part of the discussion of like, well, if you want flexibility, there's certain careers that give you more flexibility than others.
Yeah.
A second point that's different though is, I often have heard from people, Boston, San Francisco, so expensive to live there. Forget it. They are expensive. But I'll tell you, so as an example, right? I lived in San Francisco. Why did I go to And actually, me and my wife, when I was coming out of grad school, it was like, here's the list of all the pharmaceutical companies I could apply to. There's so many. How are we going to narrow it down? And we were like, yeah, we don't want to go to California. Like you said, that makes sense. We're like, don't want to go to New Jersey, right? And we sort of had a wish list, and it ended up being most of the opportunities I had were in California, so I didn't have much choice. But the good thing I would say is, it was expensive. it was really hard to buy a condo. I did it right away. I was like determined to do it. And actually Gilead helped with it because they recognized, at least that company did, it's hard to buy homes there. And so they help you to buy your first home.
Yep.
Or they did back then. But the beauty of it was is then I moved to Boston and people would joke to be like, how do you like the Boston home prices? And I'd be like, I love it. It's way cheaper than San Francisco. And so what I tell people when you're young is don't worry about that. Because you'll make do and you can always go back. Like I can now go anywhere. I can go back to North Carolina or Florida. I can go to Winnipeg. I can go to like any city and it's not a problem. But if I was living in Winnipeg and now I'm like in my 40s or 50s or later, and there's an opportunity in Boston, it's so much harder at that point to like say, okay, now I'm going to spend this is what I need to spend to like live in a new place. You kind of lose your optionality kind of by just going down that path. And
the salaries are higher too. Like since the cost of living is higher, the salaries are higher here.
Sure. And I do know, Clem mentioned that his former company helped him with the purchase of a condo. The world-class universities tend to be fairly wealthy in these large cities, and they have huge real estate arms, which can help new faculty find affordable housing. And that's true in Canada too. I was sitting in a living room of a prof at UBC, his home living room a few months ago, and he said the university, they gave him so much money to put a down payment on a house because the prices in Vancouver are very, very, very high. Maybe they rival San Francisco or Silicon Valley.
They do, yeah. My brother lives outside of Vancouver, so I know that they've got. But now there's some moratorium, I think, on foreign buyers in Canada.
Yes,
So that might decrease prices.
Yeah, the big problem in Vancouver, as with many other large metropoles around the world, is you have multi-millionaires and billionaires buying up choice real estate, and it stays vacant, being they only occupy the lodgings for a few weeks of the year. No, it's true. I wanted to point out something interesting that Clem said. As an expat Canadian, he referred to his eldest, who is graduating high school soon, as in grade 12.
Yes,
I did that on purpose.
You did that on purpose. Oh, you did that conscious. I thought it was.
I caught it too.
I thought it was an unconscious tick, but you. Okay, all right. That's good. That's good.
For the people on the call, though. For the people on the call, they say.
I did it for the people on the call. Yeah.
They say 12th grade. They don't say grade 12.
Yeah, I
grade confess, 12th grade, senior. Yeah.
When I visit relatives in Winnipeg and Toronto, I've gotten out of the habit of saying schedule. I say schedule, but I confess that when I'm back in Canada, I self-consciously put on a little bit. I just the Canadianisms just start coming out, and it becomes deliberate.
I can also hear the Canadian accent in my family now. When I talk to one of my aunts who lives in Thunder Bay, I almost want to giggle because they say "a" all the time. Like,
they're hosers. They sound like hosers.
She and her husband say "a" every fifth word or something. So you get that. I don't want to say you get that beaten out of you, but you stop doing it pretty quickly when you move here because you get teased relentlessly.
That's happened to me too.
It's happened to you too. Isn't that interesting? I have also met people here in New Jersey who were born and raised in the American South. Now they get teased quite a bit.
Southern accent is not, it doesn't sound very educated.
A Southern accent is coded in the American Northeast as ignorant or uneducated. It's not really fair. But young people move into this area here from the South, and they learn very fast that they have to lose it, and they do. And then they begin code switching, going back home to be with mom and dad, and they slip back into it. And code switching in Canada is a little bit more subtle, I think.
My family thinks I'm starting to sound American, but once in a while someone will call me out and say, "Are you Canadian?" Because I guess something has slipped, either a word I've used or how I pronounced it.
So after years of living in the States, going back to Canada, my eldest brother, who has never left Winnipeg except for 3 years in Toronto for university, has begun referring to the American situation and American politics and Americans as you people down there, and he's referring to me as part of you people down there. And I am an American citizen now, but I felt it kind of shocking to be othered. I've just become the American other for my eldest brother. Do you get the same vibe from relatives back in Winnipeg or elsewhere in Canada?
I've got
It's true.
not not exactly, but I do have an aunt who's been pleading with me to move back because of the mass shootings lately. Like the most recent one was not far from where I live, the Half Moon Bay one.
Yeah.
And so she's having a very hard time with that and pleading with me to move back. But
Yeah,
we didn't have the careers that we have if we.
it's true.
Yeah. I mean, I came to this real. I mean, we're getting older. I've lived more of my years of my life in the U.S. than in Canada now. That happened a few years ago, right? So I've been here for 25 years now, and I mean, I probably for quite a while I've more identified. I hate to say it, but more identified as American.
Yeah.
It's changing now again, though. It's kind of like I'm moving back because my kids are going to go to university in Canada.
Hooray!
Yeah. So
out on the East Coast, you think?
Yeah. Most
Okay.
likely on the East Coast.
Okay.
So like I said, my eldest is going through it right now.
Yeah.
So now it's sort of like I mean, not that my kids don't know Canada, but I'm like, oh, they're going to go to school in Canada. Who knows? They might stay there. Maybe I'll move back, right?
Wow.
You never really know.
Wow. Now, but let me, you mentioned something interesting, Clem, about how post-pandemic, everyone has had to embrace Zoom, whether they like it or not. It does afford a lot of flexibility. People don't feel they have to live in a particular place anymore. They don't feel they have to travel on all of these exhausting business trips anymore. This does open up, in principle, the possibility of relocation without professional cost, without professional downgrading of one's status. I mean, the two of you are extremely well accomplished. You are high-end executives. You have a lot of social capital between the two of you. You have extensive professional networks in your fields in business development and applied science. Presumably, if you did move back to Canada, you could maintain and continue to leverage these networks. Or would something be lost if you did move back?
Yes and yes, I would say.
Yeah,
I think there are a lot. So Angel might be different, but so the company I work for now, Redona, I just joined them full time in September. So my previous company, we were more remote. I sold that company back in May of last year. Took a little bit of time off, and then I joined this company. I joined it because of the people, and I have zero regrets. But the one thing is, I do go to the office every day now.
Oh, you do?
And I hadn't done that. I mean, I'm flexible, right?
Yeah.
But the baseline is I go to the office every day.
I do too.
And I'm like, really? And and of course it's it's funny. People are like, maybe you can convince them. And I'm like, there's nobody to convince. I'm senior management, right? It's like, I've convinced myself, right?
Yeah.
It's like, we didn't even have the discussion. If I decided I didn't want to go in, I could just be like, I'm not going in. And what are the ramifications of that? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But the reason we have that is we are a small company, 21 people now. 3/4 of the people work in the lab as scientists. We have physical lab. And I think that in this company, they made the decision during the pandemic of always having at least one person in senior management in the office during the pandemic as well, too. Because it kind of sucks to be like, you guys got to work in the lab.
Right.
Hey, but I'm working from the beach. Right?
Yeah.
And it's not very supportive. And so I think that, and what I've found is in the 6 months or so that I've been working at this company doing it, I really like it. Like I like, even though I liked being flexible and working from home, when we had that over the last few years, I kind of like going in. I get to know, because we're small, I get to know everybody really well. You get things done, like just because you bump into people, right?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Impromptu discussions that you can have, and I also go into the office routinely. Like my CEO does, my CSO does. So it behooves me, I think, to be here and interact with them. And we do have people that work remotely. That like, there's one in New York, there's one in Seattle. But I think I have an advantage being here and interacting with these people. In addition, for a little while, I was the only woman on the senior leadership team, so I thought it was especially important that I showed up and be around.
Yeah, there's that. So, sorry, I was just going to add. When I was looking for what to do after selling Checkmate, Actually, it's before I sold Checkmate that I knew that something was going to happen. Either way, I was like, either we'll sell or we'll die, right? It's like one or the other. I actually got a great job offer for a company in San Diego, and they were like, yeah, you don't need, like, it's fine, you can live in Boston.
Yeah.
And I actually, one of the reasons I decided not to take that one, I'm like, well, that's all fine, but it's not like I don't ever have to go there.
Right.
I'm probably going to want to go there every month, and I don't really want to travel anymore. I've done a lot of that. I'd rather just be home, right? Unless I have to. And so I think you can be remote, but you still need to see people.
Yeah, I have to say, like the two of you, the one thing that I missed the most during those first few awful years of the pandemic was the lack of opportunity to meet people by accident, the serendipity of impromptu, unscripted, unplanned encounters and conversations with people in the hallway, at the water cooler, the proverbial water cooler, and interesting ideas arise and bouncing ideas off of people. I mean, with Zoom, you've got to message them, you've got to set up a meeting, you've got to, there's the infrastructure, and you might just think, oh, forget it, I'll talk to them later. But, there's nothing like walking down the hall and, knocking on someone's door and just wanting to bend their ear for a little bit.
Yeah, and we just moved into our own office and a retrofitted building in the fall, and so they were like, people were giddy. They were excited to be in the new building, and now like we were in a shared building before, so now we know that everyone here works for the same company, and we can go go eat together in the kitchen or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot more. It's good for morale.
Yeah. There is an attendee to this webinar named Becky Hebert. Hello, Becky, who has asked a question related to this most recent conversation. Would either of you come back to Canada if the right job was there?
So for me, yes, but here's the thing, right? I have 4 kids now, right? So my kids are 17, actually no, she's 18 now, 18, 16 and a half, 13, and 10.
Oh, you got your hands full. Yeah.
And this is what they know. Like, this is all I know. Like, moving them is, the bar's pretty high to move them. They live their whole, even though 2 of them were born in California, they live basically their whole life here in Concord, Massachusetts. And
they would accuse you of ruining their lives.
Yeah, I should have done it. I could have done it before. I will say we've talked about it. There has been times, to answer the question, there were times when I considered jobs in Canada. There just aren't there aren't the jobs, right? There are some. There's a few companies, and maybe now, I think when we were having our pre-meeting planning, talking about this, Angela and I were talking about this. I know that when I was coming out of graduate school, I did look for jobs in Canada, and there was very few. There was a few in the Montreal area of companies, a couple in Vancouver, and there were very, very few, and I didn't have that opportunity. And a lot of those have disappeared now, right? There was a lot of big companies like Merck and AstraZeneca, and I forget, maybe Sanofi, some others that were in Montreal, Laval in particular, I think, and they all closed those sites.
Yeah.
And so now there's even less, but there are some biotech, there are some venture investors that are up there. Now with the roles that we have, I bet either one of us could go get a job like we have now in Canada if we wanted to, but back then it wasn't really an option. So we could get them, but if the personal situation allows, I could see doing it in the future. Like I said, especially if any of my kids live in Canada, I would totally be open to going back to Canada. It's just I can't do it right now. The bar's too high.
I could see myself doing it too. However, I have a husband who has a job here, and he's not Canadian, so it would be hard. I'd have to convince him to move there, and it would be a huge hit on his career because he does venture banking, which I don't even know if that exists in Canada. So it would be a tough sell for him. Our son is only 7, so we can move him, but I think maybe down the road, like Liam said, maybe it's something we consider, but then my son might be in high school, and I might be in a situation.
Oh, I don't envy anyone who tries to move with a high school age kid. That's tough. That's really tough. Our time together is rapidly drawing to a close now, but there's one other question I really want to pose to the two of you before we have to say goodbye. So I'm one of the least scientifically literate people I know. I am certain that some of the people attending this webinar are much, much more scientifically literate than me. So I must ask a science-related question with them in mind. I'm wondering if both of you could share something about your current respective biotech firms, that some technology or some product that you're most excited about, that you're really excited about, that you'd just like to share knowledge of in a sort of non-specialized way, very, briefly.
Go for it, Clem.
Oh, you're much more excited than I am.
I am. I'm
I'll
very
go first.
excited.
Sure. Yeah, I can go. I mean, so I'll preface by saying that I think a lot of it is about starting with good science, but it is about having the right people, experienced people, and then there is a lot of luck around it too, right? But our company, what I'm excited about is we're in a unique space, dysregulation, focused on targeting enzymes involved with dysregulation of RNA and DNA processing, which is a growing field, a lot of more knowledge and expertise that's been developed broadly in the field over the past few years. And particularly in our company, we have a proprietary data set and some expertise and assays, et cetera, that allow us to tackle this problem. And we've identified a bunch of targets that are of interest that we're advancing and have some exciting programs. And what I tend to look at is like, it's great to have like cool science and a cool platform. And I don't know exactly what you have, Angel, so not to be a knock on a platform company, because that's part of what we are too. But in the end, our job is to make medicine, right? And so I'm happy that we have a pipeline now. We have 4 programs that are advancing, quickly. One of them that hopefully our lead program that we'll get in the clinic beginning of next year. We're building value, right? We're building medicines that can be valuable to people, and for the business side, we're building, something that's valuable that we can either, in one instance, which is unlikely for most biotech companies, but keep developing it and become a full-fledged commercial company and sell this medicine, or more likely sell the company or license a program. I'm just excited about all that, and we're focused in oncology mainly, but also in immunology, which are just this. We're working on things where there's high unmet need, where patients need options. So it's kind of cool to be in that environment, but I also acknowledge all the time that the odds are against us, right? Most things fail, and it's just fun to be along for the ride.
Angel?
Yeah. So the analogy I like to use is that many people are familiar with the mRNA vaccines against COVID. So that's a brand new technology. And basically what it is mRNA, which is genetic material, encoding the COVID antigen, encapsulated in a lipid nanoparticle. So we're using very similar technology, but our own version of it, to develop mRNA-based therapeutics rather than vaccines. So mRNA encoding, say, a protein that your body doesn't make but you need, or it's making a mutant version of it and you're sick as a result. So we're trying to send in the natural or wild type version of it in a lipid nanoparticle. And what's different about our lipid nanoparticles is all the conventional ones go to the liver, but we can send them elsewhere in the body. So as a result of that, our first 2 diseases that we're working on, we are building a pipeline too, Clem. Our first, and actually we'll be a clinical stage company by next quarter. Our first program is in primary ciliary dyskinesia, which is a lot like cystic fibrosis. The cilia in the lungs don't move and they accumulate a lot of phlegm in their lungs. And so they're chronically out of breath and get infections, etc. There is a shorter, it does reduce their lifespan as well. And then our second program is for cystic fibrosis. So it's 10% of patients don't make any, the protein's called CFTR. They don't make any CFTR at all. So they can't use the Vertex drugs, which are kind of the standard because there's no protein to drug. So we're trying to help their bodies make that protein that it doesn't make so that they can regain their lung function. And if you don't know CF, it's a horrible disease.
Yeah, it's
they
terrible.
do not live long.
Yeah.
And then we plan to expand into different therapeutic areas and go to different organs too. So I'm super excited about the technology.
The therapeutics that you envisage, this would be administered orally? This would be a
So the
pill?
two, good question. The two lead programs are both inhaled, and
Or
subsequent
inhaled?
ones will likely be IV.
Mhm.
We're also trying to see if we can deliver genetic medicines to the brain, in which case those would probably be intrathecal, which means it goes in through in between the vertebrae into the cerebral spinal fluid. Or even direct administration into the brain. So they would drill a little hole. Yeah, but you would do that for very serious neurological diseases where there's a high tolerance for that kind of intervention.
So fascinating. We don't have much time left. A very interesting question has just popped up from, I believe, a current undergraduate student at U of W. Ava Storsley asks, as a prospective graduate student, specifically eyeing the Bay Area, UCSF and Stanford, and specifically with an interest in embryology, do you have any tips for beginning the process of finding a supervisor and applying to programs?
I would suggest that she start perusing the faculty at Stanford and UCSF for that matter, because they also have a great life science graduate program. But start perusing the faculty at those those places and see if there's one that that looks interesting to her. In terms and she could reach out maybe ask Clean for this part, but she could reach out to those people proactively too. But she still has to get through the admission process, which is tough.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But Clean should comment since he's the one that proactively chose his advisor. I didn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's still the same. If you have people in mind, you can reach out to them. I mean, I do remember going, besides, it's another benefit of the University of Winnipeg, and particularly working with Andrew Grant, who just messaged. He's listening
I
too.
saw that.
Great. Hi, Andrew. I had the opportunity, thanks to Professor Grant, to go to a conference, American Chemical Society conference. And there was one speaker there in a huge lecture hall who was like, that'd be cool to work from. Happened to be a guy at Caltech at the time. And Andrew was like, let's go up and talk to him. Like so he finished his huge like headline talk. There's a line of people. It was like, we just chatted with him and said, I might be interested in England grad school. And Professor Grant like vouched for me. He was right there. And I stayed in touch with him, and he's like, let me know when you apply, like, because such and such person reviews them for organic chemistry, and I'll help you with that.
Got it. So they could help the facilitate.
They can.
Okay.
Yeah. So I didn't end up going to Caltech or even getting into Caltech. It's a longer story. He ended up going to a different school. And then he was like, hey, you want to come with me? Actually, it was in Switzerland. And I thought about it, and I was like, I don't want to go to Switzerland. But yeah, they can definitely help you. So I would say definitely reach out. And if you can see them in person at something like that, that's even better.
Great suggestion. Yeah.
Now, Clean, Professor Andrew Grant has just placed a little notice in our in the chat box, notifying us that he has a great picture of you from your U of W days. Unfortunately, we have no way of sharing that photo with all the webinar participants. Maybe for the best, or maybe not.
Maybe for the best. All the hair was here instead.
Anyway,
and I color my hair, but I have a ton of gray hair.
Well, look, the two of you are very busy people, and I am so grateful to both of you for giving me so much of your time and for giving all of us so much of your time. And it's been, the time has just flown by. We had some very good questions. I had mentioned to you earlier that if there weren't any student questions, I would just make stuff up. And like Darcy from Kamloops, BSc 2002, but I didn't have to, actually. The time flew by. So I want to thank the two of you very much. Just before we sign off, I just want to mention one more time to the webinar attendees to put on their calendar a couple of upcoming dates of future webinars in this series. Thursday, February the 16th at 6 p.m. Central, we have two alums from the 1980s, that mighty decade. Tara Shuchuk, who is a VP at Medtronics in Minneapolis, will be joined by Julie Friesen from the New York City Department of Health, and they will be talking about careers in public health and in health services more broadly. And then on Tuesday, March the 21st at 6 p.m. Central, we have Professor Jordan Sloshower of the Yale School of Medicine, BSc 2005, who will be talking about the use of psychotropic drugs, the use of psychedelics in modern medical therapeutics. So keep that in mind. Thanks again to Angel Maki and to Kleem Chowdhury. It was so great to reunite the two of you again and to get to know you a little bit in the course of our chat. And
it was my pleasure.
Yeah,
I hope that we
thank you for
inspired.
hosting.
I hope we inspired a bunch of people.
It was tons of fun. And thanks, everyone. All the best to you. Have a good night. And we hope to see you at another event run by the U of W Alumni Association. Okay, take care. Enjoy your families, guys. Be well.